The recording is starting. Then.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Evers. I'm a program administrator with DHCD, and I'll be monitoring today's presentation titled Pre-Contract Negotiations and Getting Under Contract, showing DHCD your why. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and add them to the chat. And if we run out of time to address your questions, we will definitely follow up with you. And also, we wanted to let you know that the slides and the presentation will be available after today, so you don't have to take pictures of the slides or anything like that. And our presenters today are Stuart Burrill and Deanna Stoddard. Stuart is a program administrator with DHCD who works with a number of different programs. He lives in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, with his 8-year-old son and their rescued retired greyhound named Ladybug, who is very cute. We also have Deanna, who's a program administrator with DHCD in the Abington office. She has roots in Southwest Virginia, having grown up in Big Stone Gap. Before coming to DHCD, Deanna was proud to be a member of the Planning District Commission family in that region at the Lenoisco PDC. Please join me in welcoming Stuart and Deanna.
Thank you, Jenna, for that kind introduction. This is Stuart Burrell. And thank you, Kelly, for that great lead-in with your planning grant presentation. As Kelly mentioned, a planning grant is probably the single best thing you can do to help you get through the process of getting under contract as smoothly and quickly as possible, and for your project to be successful in the long term. We cannot recommend planning grants enough. We already covered that, so I'll leave the slide up. I want to just take a minute to let you know that this presentation is an overview of the process of getting under contract, a 30,000-foot view, if you will. As you go through the process of getting under contract, there will be a lot of conversations between the grant manager and your program administrator, or PA. Every grant is unique. Follow the guidance of the PA and don't be afraid to ask questions. This is work where it really is better to ask permission than forgiveness. I know that goes against the grain for some of us, myself included sometimes. And this presentation focuses on the process of getting a CDBG grant under contract, but much of it applies to ARC and other grants. And as you can see, here is the process of going from application through the executed contract. You know, your application was accepted, and that's how it was approved, and that's how we got here. I think one thing to note is it is with a little humility and grace that we will get through this together. You will get through it working with your program administrator closely. You will get through it working with other DHCD staff closely, including the program manager. You know, it really is a process of working together to make this project successful. So the contract negotiation meeting is probably the most important meeting of the whole project. And let's talk about that for a minute. Why we do a contract negotiation meeting is to start with, we want to do the heavy lift in the beginning. We want to begin with the end in mind, as is often said. When we do this, it helps projects run smoother and avoids problems by addressing things when they're little topics of conversation rather than crisis. In this meeting, we will confirm the grant information from the grant application, and that's where we take a lot of our information is straight from your application. Make sure DHCD has the correct information to draw up the contract. We'll discuss the project and issues that may arise. We'll review DHCD requirements, review documentation that is needed during the pre-contract period, and review deadlines. Just one note, oftentimes we call the contract negotiation record, which is a document that accompanies this meeting, CNR. And nowadays we're doing these both virtual, in person, and as a mix, as sometimes somebody can't make it down from Richmond or over from the other end of the state. So we're going to try and take some questions throughout this. If you just post them in the chat, we'll give you just a moment, see if there's any quick questions. Oh, did I skip a few? Excuse me, sometimes my nerves get the better of me. I forgot. So why this meeting is so important is it's used to set the expectations that carry into the legally binding contract. Expectations include what you're going to do, how much money we are going to provide, and how much money or leverage you are going to provide. Talk about what you should do to prepare for this meeting. Review the application you submitted beforehand. Get the right people in the room. Have everyone come prepared. We cannot stress this enough. Review your application. Be ready and willing to ask questions. This is the best time to ask a lot of questions before we get under contract so that we can iron out any concerns or questions you have before we find ourselves too deep into this project or deeper into this project. You want to tell us what has changed since the application, and you want to make sure our information is correct. So as I said, who should be in this meeting? We want the grant manager, obviously. We want the grantee's chief administrative official. After all, they're signing a legally binding contract that's usually for 6 figures, occasionally 7. So, it's important that they're there and actively involved in this process. That might be the county administrator, might be a town manager. We want the grantee's finance person. Funds from DHCD, CDBG grants route through the grantee's finance office and then are often paid out to other organizations. So we want other key personnel from the grantee or the community. On the DHCD side, we'll have a program administrator there, a program manager, and often associate director will be participating. Now my questions, forgive me for going a little fast. Is there any quick questions anybody has? Make sense so far?
None yet.
All right. So this is what a sample, the first part of a sample CNR looks like. Every CNR is customized to your project, this being the Possum Hollow water line. We love doing projects in Marsupial County and Possum Hollow. So we go over it. One thing to note is we always want a clear project location. Somebody with no knowledge of your community needs to be able to come in and say, okay, I understand it's from point A to point B, and they should be able to draw a pretty easy circle on a map around it. Also, your application includes maps, but we need a clearly defined project area. And note that a lot of this information is going to carry directly into the contract as we write it. So, again, let us know if it's not right. If we've got the number of households wrong, the number of LMI persons to benefit, that's something we need to fix now, not a year after the fact. And we've got project activities. Administration is always a project activity. And then often we list specific activities relevant to the project. So during the contract negotiation meeting, we're not going to read every word from all of our topics. I'm not going to here. I'm going to cover a lot of the topics, just hit them briefly as we get into the slides. Also, remember these slides will be available to you again soon, or be available to you soon. Overall idea again is let's make each other aware of potential issues now and bring up things that so we can avoid them becoming major issues and crises in the future. One of the key statements we do at every contract negotiation record is to remind everybody that all activities must be completed as contracted. no increase in project scope is allowed, and no decrease in LMI benefit is allowed. So part of the contract negotiation record is the conditions, revisions, and unresolved issues. And here is a rather long list of things we at least touch on briefly. And I'm not going to read you all the verbiage you'll get in the contract negotiation, in part because every CNR is customized to your project. Project management team, you'll need to have one, and we'll discuss who will need to be on it. One thing I want to make note of is community members, aka spark plugs, such as the ones as Kelly talked about, can bring credibility, important insights, and help manage community expectations. This is particularly important for housing rehab and downtown improvement projects. So, get good community members involved who will show up to meetings and provide open, honest feedback. And managing community expectations, I think, is an important, sometimes overlooked part of this. The community may wonder why things aren't happening terribly quickly. They're thinking we asked for this 4 years ago. Well, now we're 6 months away from dirt turning, and by what we're used to, that may not be terribly slow. But if you're in the community, it can be. So getting community members who can be that important conduit between the project and the community can really help manage expectations. We'll touch on the pre-contract period, which is typically 120 days from the meeting to get under contract. And contracts typically are for 24 months. Timely completion must be the priority for the grantee. We'll touch on the environmental review record. Kelly has done wonderful presentations on those again, and we're not going to go into much detail here, but know that the ERR process can take over 60 days to complete. Therefore, it is imperative that as the grantee, you start this process immediately at the time of this meeting if you haven't already well before, and we hope you have well before. Consultants and contracts, no agreement should be executed without DHCD consent, and no agreement should be executed prior to executing the CDBG contract. Having your program administrator review all contracts and or change orders before they are binding can save you a lot of money, because we don't want to get to the point that, oh no, find out after the fact that something wasn't eligible. We want to understand that well before anybody enters into a contract and has to put out money. Interagency agreements, we'll discuss what types of interagency agreements you need. Sometimes it's one with a public service authority. Sometimes it's one with an employer if it's a more economic development focused project. There's just different types of interagency agreements. I can think of one I have right now that has both an agreement with an employer, a town, and the PSA because of its nature. Build America, Buy America, or BABA, is becoming one of our newer acronyms that we're all having to learn and try to understand. CDBG projects receiving federal FY23 funds are subject only to iron and steel requirements. Projects receiving federal FY24 funds will be subject to iron, steel, and specifically listed construction materials. And there will be more information to come in the future on BABA from PAAO and DHCD. So depending on the project type, you're going to need to do different types of inspections. They might be housing rehab inspections. They might be engineers inspections. We'll touch on that and talk about that. Prior authorizations is an important and sometimes overlooked topic. If you don't request prior authorization for an expense before the contract's effective date, DHCD cannot pay for it. And this includes for grant management, engineering services, or any other items. So if you want to try and get anything paid for, talk to your program administrator about requesting a prior authorization. It's not terribly difficult. It's usually just a letter, but we've got to have that done and documented and approved beforehand. We want to see a current engineer's cost estimate for projects. We all know that projects with a 5-year-old engineer's cost estimate, that might not fly nowadays. Pricing on products and construction have changed dramatically over the past 5 years. So we want to know how much it's going to cost and talk about whether or not the funds we're providing in your match is enough to successfully complete the project. Touching on the project budget, the grantee must review and update the project budget in CAMS. This needs to be done like almost everything in consultation with your program administrator. Now, once you've got the project budget in CAMS, it can take up to a month for a budget to be finalized after the executed contract has been uploaded. And one reason we do this is it's part of DHCD's financial controls. We want to help ensure that payments are not processed before an executed contract that binds us both is in place. Also, when a project budget is approved, CAMS should generate an email that's sent to you. Save a copy of this email to your grant files, please. Leverage or match funds. All required leverage must be secured before the contract is executed. Now, it's great when a project gets extra leverage after, if we come in and we agree it's going to be a $2.5 million project and all of a sudden you get another grant. That's great. But, we're going to talk about the required match for that project if it requires a match at all. So remittance requests, this can take a moment to talk about these. DHCD expects remittance requests for each CDBG funded budget activity to be submitted at least quarterly. It can take up to 30 days for you to be paid after you submit for the locality grantee to be paid after they submit a remittance request. Please plan accordingly. If you're new to working with DHCD, you'll have to get set up with Virginia's Department of Accounts or DOA, and that can take some time. Many PAs will review draft remittances before they're submitted. And also talk with your PA about what supporting documentation they want to see included in your remittance. Sometimes people submit documentation that isn't quite what we need. Let's figure that out beforehand. Or if you have a particularly complicated remittance, it's great to have your program administrator review it before you submit it. I know I've been doing that with a lot of my projects, and I find it just makes the process run smoother. So as for the remittances, once they come to DHCD, 3 to 4 people each review the remittance for a number of different factors. And I want to touch back and stress that it can take a bit of time for the grantee to be paid. Please plan accordingly. So if you're expecting, it may take 30 days from the remittance for us to pay you, if your contractor is hollering, why am I not paid? You need to understand you may need to bridge the gap, or we may need to look at doing a payment, a remittance in a different way. Work with your program administrator. So are there any questions at the moment?
Hey, this is Elizabeth. I just wanted to add on to something about the remittance request in case people don't know it. As part of the review process, it has to be signed off by HUD, and we have no control over how long it takes HUD to review your remittance request and approve its payment. And also, we actually don't pay it. DOA, the Department of Accounts, pays it. And again, we have no control over how long DOA takes to review them. I do know it does tend to take them a little longer during the holiday season, so keep that in mind. And I believe there's a question for you, Stuart, from Marion about prior authorizations.
Give me just a moment. I want to touch on something. Also, DHCD towards in June sometime, usually we end up freezing out our remittance payment process, our remittance submission process, because we have to wrap up our fiscal year books. And I know many other organizations, seems like we get a rush in late May, early June, as other organizations are looking to wrap up their books. So just be aware that and the holidays, end of the year, can be pinch points. If you've submitted the remittance and you haven't gotten paid after about 35 or so days, reach back out to your program administrator and ask them to look into it. Marion, I see you've got a question about the point of prior authorizations. You can bill, so part of it is billing for things like sometimes the public hearing ads. Those happen before the contract, before a project goes under contract. I know sometimes, engineering work. So we can't bill for prior costs anyway, correct? You you're limited on what you can and can't bill for, and that really is a kind of devil's in the detail questions, like a lot of the work we do. So talk with your program administrator, and if they don't know, they may need to reach out to their colleagues or the program manager. Dig into it and don't be afraid to ask those questions. And I see Amanda has raised her hand. If you would, Amanda.
Thanks, Stuart, and Marion, thanks for the question. Frankly, it's art, not science. So the advice to have a conversation with your program administrator is essential. I would like to add one more thing, is that as well as the items listed on Stuart's piece there, we want to make sure that everybody is clear that you cannot sign construction contracts during the pre-contract period. If that happens, if you want CDBG money to go into that contract, it cannot be signed before you get your contract from us. It makes things really messy and everybody gets unhappy, and there's just a lot of unpleasantness when that happens because we can't unring that bell. So just be mindful of that. We know that people are always in a hurry. We know that you want for Ms. Jones to be able to turn her spigot and get clean water. We want that too. We also have to make sure that HUD's requirements are met. So please don't put us in the position of being the bad guy. Make sure that things happen in sequence. Thanks.
And in the
So I
interest
was
of time,
gonna,
we've got a lot more ground to cover in this presentation. It's very dense. If you have one quick comment, Elizabeth?
yeah, I do have one quick comment. You need to remember that one of the reasons we don't allow you to sign contracts before you sign our contract or expend money unless you get prior authorization is because when you sign a contract, you're obligating funds, and until our contract is signed, you don't have funds to obligate. So it becomes an accounting nightmare. It could result in a finding or something. I'm not in accounting. When you get your financial reports done, your audit done. But one of the reasons we do the prior authorization is because the fact you can't obligate funds until you've got our contract signed. And that's sort of our way to get around it. Thank you, Stuart.
Stuart,
Marion,
oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think you're just about to address it, Marion.
Yeah, Marion, we'll come back to you when we get more time. If you could hold on to your question or type it into the chat. Any questions we can't get to during this presentation, we will follow up, and we appreciate your patience because we know this is a lot of information. Thank you. So, getting into more conditions, revisions, and unresolved issues, we require you to participate in training. You're here, you're doing this. Great job. Keep track of it, put it in your grant files. Um, Progress reports. You're going to work out what with your program administrator what kind of progress reports and when and how they need to be submitted into CAMS. From project promotion and outreach, we really want to encourage you to get the word out about your project. Mailing out newsletters to area residents, Facebook posts, press releases, etc., are all highly recommended. When you do these, please share these with your program administrator and put them in your grant files. Please recognize DHCD when you promote a project. Also, DHCD loves to share out stories about projects on our own Facebook page and through our own channels. DHCD requires that there be a project sign. Benefit and confirmation tracking. We will confirm the number of households and persons to benefit from this project, as you noticed during the contract negotiation record that we showed earlier, the sample. All income surveys and user agreements will be verified, and they need to be recent and all filled out properly. We also discuss how we will verify the project benefit performance measures during the closeout process. So again, we're beginning with the end in mind. All LMI households must be connected to water improvements at no cost if you're doing a water project, and any LMI household that lacks indoor plumbing in a project area must be rehabilitated and addressed. Again, this also where a planning grant is great. You may find out about these houses beforehand, and we have the IPR program. That's a great program that you may be able to address it with that funds as opposed to just CDBG funds or others. Kathy is going to talk more about monitoring and compliance reviews during her presentation on Thursday. Want to let you know you can expect at least 2 usually, an interim and a final. And for projects that drag out longer, you may get multiple interim compliance reviews. Future project phases, we want to know if we're going to need to come back to this, and if this is going to be phase 1 of however many, or phase 2 of more. I want to note about easements and permits that you really want these done before the start of construction. Again, something planning grants can help you with, because delays can cause a cascading effect and really delay a whole project. Procurement. Please pay attention to procurement in general. It's a common area where there are issues. Procurement includes being sure to request a wage decision when a purchase involves installation or labor and is over $2,000. In general, follow the Virginia Public Procurement Act and Davis-Bacon. We'll also want to see your procurement policies and see that you're following them. Construction delays and material costs. As noted, and as we've all seen, construction delays are becoming fairly common. Materials costs are hopefully starting to level out, maybe decline a little bit, but there was a period where they were really rather unstable and rising. We want to know beforehand or as soon as possible if there's something that's going to impact construction delays and create construction delays. Touch on a few other topics that come up. Title searches, what is the status of your title searches? Do you foresee problems with cloudy titles or air titles? And we'll have more about air properties in the next section. If you suspect lead in any home, talk with your program administrator. DHCD has a lead hazard reduction program that may be able to help, and we can often braid funds in from that program with CDBG funds. Housing rehab projects have some of their own special topics. You'll need a very specific housing rehab program design and to do housing inspections. Community service facilities. And Kelly strongly recommended a planning grant in part for these because they tend to be a little more complicated. And they have their own questions, such as about a pro forma staffing operations plan or business plan. Yeah, and how are you going to document LMI benefit? BDR or business district revitalization and facade improvement programs have their own special issues, and we may chat about them, particularly again, how you're going to achieve benefit. Program income, we're seeing less projects that have program income, but if you're going to have program income, we want to talk about it and develop a plan for it. And we'll take brief questions before turning it over to my wonderful colleague, Deanna Stoddard. Are any brief questions? All right. And turning it over now to Deanna. Thank you so
much. It looks like we might have one question.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry.
Is housing rehabilitation specialist training planned for this year?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you would know that, Stuart.
Okay, yes, we are planning a 1 or 1.5 day training just like this virtually for the rehab specialist this year. And we'll know more about that probably late April, early May.
Okay. And I think Marion's questions might have been addressed via the chat by Joanne. Is that right, Marion?
Incredibly knowledgeable and is a wonderful resource for all of us.
Oh, Marion, you can go ahead.
I'm sorry, I can wait until the session's over. I do still have questions.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to wait, that would be wonderful. And we'll be sure to get to you. And both my and Deanna's contact information will be up at the end, and you can reach out to us or the program administrator you frequently work with.
Amanda had also just commented in the chat that we'll be available today and the next 2 days after for as long as we need to be to get questions answered as well while everyone is together. So just to point that out. Thanks, Stuart. I'll just tell you now, I'm a much better talker than I am a speaker. So I don't know how long I'll be on this camera, but we're going to give it our best shot. So Stuart is my clicker. So bear with me as I have to let him know when to advance slides. It's going to be interesting. And we're going to start off with boxing gloves. You're going to listen to me for a minute before we advance through the slides, and that should go pretty quickly, but lots of thoughts come to mind when you think punch list, you know, and the reason the boxing gloves came to me was I thought at this point, Stuart's portion of the contract negotiation record is bulk. You know, when you're sitting in this meeting, you're hearing conversation, you're hearing discussion, getting the details right. And the punch list would appear to be a, you know, easy peasy. It's a thing that you can just breeze through. It's not necessarily so. So right now you're hearing all this stuff in this meeting thinking, well, hey, I'm either like floating like a butterfly because I got all this time on my hands. Look at all this time they're giving me, but it could also sting like a bee. So, you know, at this point we're looking at a punch list as one of those things that you hear in construction a lot. A lot of us are familiar with that term. And I did not know that the term punch list came from the fact that years ago, when you would complete a task together, you know, when these groups would get together for these projects, they would literally punch a hole in paper. Well, we've evolved from paper, and maybe some people want to punch a hole through a wall during a punch list. You know, I've met a few of those contractors. But the point being that this list can be bittersweet, and in the essence of why and where we're trying to discuss where to save time, where to get under contract, and how, you know, whether you're a greenhorn or you've been around many years, there are ways to save time. There are ways you can create delays. There are sometimes unintended consequences. So before I get into the other slides, I want to at least say to caution you, don't let that time sneak up on you. And that goes for DHCD as well as grantees. That being said, I'm going to do my best to provide some takeaways as we go into this second part. And again, I'm not going to advance the slide yet because I want you to hear what I'm saying here. Literally, this punch list is created as, you know, it's known to be one of those things that's a final stage. well, we're not at the final stage. We're not technically even in the beginning yet of your project, but it is the final stage of completing your application process, your award, and getting you to contract. None of this is typically understood by people in your communities. We know this. So if you've ever gotten an award and it's been made public, you know that the community is already watching you. They're wanting to know where this money is and how it's being spent. They've chances are been waiting for services or something for a long time. So if you've ever received a grant award, you know that once it's announced, it's feet on the ground as far as they're concerned. So this period is usually full of phone calls and answering questions about when are you going to get my water line going, or when is somebody coming to fix my roof? That's reality. So in the meantime, you've got this list to accomplish. Together with your program administrator, you have got to work out a process for dealing with how to get these things done in their draft form and reaching the final stage for approval, while juggling the needs of the community. So bear that in mind, and we know it's not always easy. So it's critical that the pre-contract time period is used not only wisely and productively, but that we're all prepared to get our drafted contract routed through its approval and execution process with everyone on the same page. That's the point of this meeting, and ready to hit the ground running once it's executed, because by then there are already people thinking you're late. So that's the need for this punch list. A few things to note as we start taking a look at these things in a little more detail. I want you to keep a couple of things in mind, especially as we continue with that same template. The templates vary. When you see your contract negotiation record, the punch list is the last couple of pages. So it doesn't look like a lot, and it looks like, oh, well, I can just start doing these things one after the other and crossing them off the list. Yes, that's true, but there's a lot of detail into those, and there can be potentially a lot of time wasting pitfalls, and we'll get into those. My hope is that you'll leave the session today with something useful, whether you're around for 30 days in your job or you've been around, 3 decades. This is an ever-changing, evolving type of work that we do. We all know that, and we can still learn from each other. So don't take for granted that you are doing something the same way and that it's necessarily the way it should be. But also use the wisdom of those who've been there before you. I can speak from experience on that one. Also, time management is our friend. I'm not the best at it, but I'm always having to remind myself. And yes, I will reach out as a program administrator to someone managing a project with me. But ultimately, the responsibility is on both of us. You can't disappear, grantees. You need to be constantly checking in and saying, here's where I am with this. We would much rather hear from you too much to know where something is, even if it's a quick email, than to be wondering. So don't be surprised if we have to check in and say, hey, where are we with this? I hope in this session you'll pick up on some time savers, where best to be proactive, and I'm hoping also that ones I've missed, you may be looking at this and have a light bulb moment. And if you do, please share it. If you haven't noticed already, the language can be confusing. So especially if you're new, you're probably like, I have no clue what that is, or what is that acronym? I will tell you one of my first tasks that I put on myself when I started, and then I had to compare with Kelly because she and I think a lot alike. I'm like, I have created an acronym dictionary for myself. I am so confused. And I thought I knew a few things when I came on board, but there's still a lot. I mean, we were even in a session yesterday, kind of doing dry runs and things for the workshop. And one of our colleagues even said, hey, what is that? What is that acronym? It's common. So please, my point being, don't let that go under your radar and not bring it up. Because if you don't know, you can't do it. You can't take care of it, and it's not going away. It'll come up throughout the project. You can count on it. So know the language, and you might hear the same document or project type referred to in 10 different ways, depending on what stage you came in, to the agency with. For example, I never knew a CIG was a community improvement grant as compared to CDBG. And essentially they're the same, but I thought they were two completely different things. So clarify your terminology and understand what we're even looking for. Do a little bit of homework. And if that means putting in the time to do that, it will help you and pay off big time throughout your project, I promise. There are also, as we look at these next slides, there are typically 20 or so activities. We won't go into detail on each one of those. However, I want to differentiate when you're in the actual meeting, the parts that Stuart went through, those tend to be the bulk of the conversation where you're clarifying data, clarifying things you have to capture to get it right so everyone knows moving forward the details to be in the contract. The punch list is a little more detailed in the sense that some of it's like, yeah, been there, done that. We've done this 100 times. Some of it not. It is project specific. So there may be things there that you go, oh, okay, no big deal. Audits. Well, we're going to get into that one, for example, in a little bit. It's a big deal. There are some things in there that may have more time involved than you think from looking at it during your meeting. So that being said, despite the contract negotiation meeting, having two sections and one looking like it has more to do with a checklist than the other, together, the bulk of that information, if I had to give you one good key takeaway about the literal paperwork as a stapled packet, for example, have that as your go-to throughout the rest of this process, the rest of the project life, because the data that's captured there will be repeated over and over and over. That is why it has to be right. So, in order to comply with a lot of the state and federal regulations, as Stuart kind of mentioned earlier, also know with this punch list, and this isn't because your program administrator wants to be difficult or DHCD wants to be difficult, we both have to acknowledge that there are just a lot of things that are, it's a pill you have to swallow, and it's just things that have to get done. And we don't want to debate it back and forth any more than you do, but rest assured someone before us has already fought that battle, and whatever got handed down is what it is. Okay. So just sometimes it's black and white and there's just no getting around it, and we'll work together to get it accomplished. But the things where there is some wiggle room on time or needing to come up with a way to get something done, we can do that. But just know there are the other regulatory agencies involved. Those things we just all have to work together to accomplish them. It is what it is. Okay, so with all that being said, I have to tell you the good news and the bad news as far as floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. It's both. So let's advance to the next slide and we'll kind of break it down a little bit. I hope I haven't lost anyone so far. The first thing we want to notice about this is the statement that's preceding the actual numbered activities. Typically in a meeting, we'll literally read these line for line just to make sure everyone understands. But the circled date that for this Possumville project indicates something very, very important to differentiate. This is a grantee's deadline and your program administrator's deadline for committing to when the contract package is going to go down the line or, up the chain, however you want to look at it. That's when we have to be in agreement as to when the package is ready to go and we're asking for approval. So based on what I've circled there, the other couple of things that I want you to notice about it is that date can easily be misinterpreted, and it varies depending on the type of project you have. So the date will be calculated based on the type of project that you have and clearly stated here for everyone to reference what your time frame is, when your time has started. So technically right now we're at the starting line. It's go time. As you look over activities 1 through 5, less experienced project manager might not recognize that there are at least a couple of things here that have some of those pitfalls that I mentioned for consuming your time. At the very, first one that comes to mind when you look at it, I hope, is number 3, the environmental review record. That process can be long, and to be honest, I haven't had a project that I've worked on yet where they've been the same. So just looking at that list, whether you're experienced or not, you may or may not want to change up the order. That they're not in necessarily a sequential order for the way you should be tackling them. It's kind of an overview. At the very least, we begin to see the start of a list that depends on other people too. Other people's schedules involving other people, like, you know, a newspaper printing company, whoever your publication folks are in your area, your locality, your government, your governing body's calendar. There are so many things you have to be aware of that are not within your control. So again, don't let that time sneak away from you, and try to find ways throughout this process that you can keep your time and not let it fall into those pitfalls. Okay, Stuart, next slide. Just a few key takeaways from that first few activities. You're already getting a test in your acronym knowledge. So PMT and FMS, your project management team and your facilitated management session. Remember to factor potential conflicts of interest. For example, as a grantee, you want to develop, of course, your project management team, and work with everyone to help kind of come up with the best team. And sometimes it's people you've seen in various other projects. You know, you'll have frequent hitters, you know, in there that are happy to serve and continue to serve. But at the same time, it isn't uncommon to recognize that there may be a conflict of interest or someone that might be a better spark plug for getting out there and engaging the community, or helping you to communicate with them when you need something that might be a little more difficult, as, you know, kind of quote unquote, I use this term loosely, the outsider. You know, that's something that we always look for, that you don't maybe get into so much in the discussion at the contract negotiation record, but it is something to keep in mind. The facilitated management session that's mentioned in those activities is like a huddle. It's intended to clarify the roles for everyone and the responsibilities, get everybody on the same page during this pre-contract period. It's not uncommon for it to change through the life of the project, but sometimes your management team, or in the case of housing rehab, your rehab oversight board, those have to possibly be changed sometime later. But initially in this phase, we want it locked down. Even if it's not all signed, we want it locked down. And soon after this meeting, your contract negotiation meeting, we want to schedule that facilitated management session. The environmental review record, a couple of key takeaways there. Probably there is a designated environmental review record person in your office, on your staff. Everyone should at least be familiar with the importance and the time consumption that environmental reviews take, even if there is a designated person in your office. And we like knowing who those people are, because we often have to share information with each other. So that's always helpful to know who that designated person is. Also, here's another acronym: National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requires it. There's no way around it. This is one of those pills you have to swallow. The environmental impact of your project, if any, has to be determined. The related to the budget in those 5 activities, and P4P. If you don't know what that is, that's a little bit different acronym, but it's pay for performance. Our project managers and grant services managers should especially pay attention to those things, because we can't get under contract unless your budget is correct and ready in CAMS. And part of that admin agreement that you get ready during this phase as well, this is a section of that, your pay for performance threshold table. And every remittance you submit for admin payment later will be compared to this right here. So contracts can't be issued until the budget's in CAMS. That could be a holdup. And the pay for performance threshold table has to align with the DHCD program design. And again, it's directly tied to your payment. So it's pretty important. Okay, next slide. So our products have begun. Lists here 6 through 13. Many of you'll recognize that these are possibly even a breeze to go through them. I would say copy and paste can sometimes not be your best friend. That would be the easiest slip up to make, I would say, as we possibly go through and create some of these documents to get them adopted. But beware, some of these things are not fixable if they aren't done the first time correctly. We'll get into that in a sec. It's okay if you don't understand what a lot of these things are. You'll notice that every one of them has where to refer to it in the DHCD manual. And my understanding is, before anyone asks, that we have revisions and updates to that coming very, very soon. We're on the threshold of it, and Elizabeth's shaking her head. But the appendices are very helpful, because if you go to that first, when you're creating these documents, the templates are almost unchanged. But the ones that are, because you're going to be in a constant communication with your program administrator, that will give you a starting point. They will help you to determine which templates are ready to use, ones that might need a little revision. This is where your communication style with them is going to be very important, because you're going to bounce those drafts back and forth in order to reach the final approved copy to go into the grant contract package. So recognize that the appendices are there to help you. And in addition to your best in-house resource, being your program administrator, you can still reference the manual to get a good explanation, which I think accompanies most of these appendices as well, as to what they actually are. I think the one that came up yesterday was Meeby Weeby, and someone said, "What is that?" Well, it's number 6 there. It's referring to an ad, and we've just gotten, that's just a common term we use now, but it is an actual ad. So if you'll notice at the bottom there, I've just circled programmatic documents, only to highlight. I'm guilty in the beginning of having looked at that and been like, I don't even know what that is. And we just breeze right by it. So spend a little time discussing during this time of your contract negotiation, what are my programmatic documents? Basically, it just refers to the things that are specific to your project. And that can be a lot of different things. Your program administrator and the others on hand during your negotiation meeting will help you come up with what those things are. Usually you don't get to this point and not know, but this is the time to have that discussion. And because it's part of the checklist, we can't move forward without it. Okay, Stuart, next slide. More key takeaways there from that specific section of the punch list regarding procurement and ads. And again, this is to help you conserve your time and use it the best you can. Publication requirements are very specific. They require proof. You're working with outside folks to get that done. So doing them correctly the first time saves you time by not having to republish. And as much as I hate to say it, we would have to be the bad guy and tell you, sorry, it has to be republished. So that's a really easy example of one that could go awry if you don't work it out with your program administrator in the beginning and say, yes, this copy looks good. Yes, this size looks good. Yes, the size of the publication for the reach that it needs to have is good. That's an easy one that would delay you because you're at the mercy of their print schedule and everything else. So you might not have realized that. Procurement could also, while you're looking at that section of the punch list, could also include things like engineering, grant management, in case you were wondering what you might need to be procuring. That again is specific to your project. Adopting documents, just want to remind everyone, it will be very helpful if you have your governing bodies meeting calendars handy. Keep those in mind when you're planning to get things adopted, because you're all trying to work together and not rush and get things done at the last minute. But oftentimes it's, oh my gosh, they meet Tuesday and I don't have this ready and I needed it signed, because all of us are pulling at each other to get to the same end goal. But at the same time, their schedule is what it is, and you need them. So be aware of their schedules and be sensitive to that and be prepared so that they can get you what you need. Also, be aware of the products that require posting. Oftentimes, once something is adopted, it has to be posted, and take your photos. If we don't see that it was posted, then we can't verify that's your documentation. So that's a little bit of a process there, but please keep adopting documents in mind when looking at your time. Contracts and agreements, your program administrator is supposed to review everything. And like we said a moment ago, can't emphasize enough, any agreements that you enter into that you expect CDBG funds to pay for, don't go too far. And because you may not get that money back. And it kind of goes the same with some other documents. Don't go too far with executing and waste other people's time, especially your governing body when they only meet maybe once a month, before you and your program administrator come to some final decisions. Okay, next slide. punch list activities 14 through 19 on this list. You can read that for yourselves, but I want to point out a couple of things. Number 14, documentation of public hearings. Yay! Here's something you should already be able to punch off the list, because that activity probably was completed and documented in your application phase or your planning grant phase. It's just an example of how some things may already be completed or semi-complete as you start on this list. But let's also talk about audits for a moment. That's why I have it circled. We've just come out of a period where many of you may have even gotten communication or had to submit some exceptions requests. Everybody everywhere is struggling to get audits completed. You don't have people to hire to do them, or they're behind. We understand everybody seems in every region of Virginia seems to be having issues with this. So we get it. And if you've never seen a red label across your account in CAMS, good for you. Your funds didn't come to a screeching halt because you hit the deadline for submitting your last year's audit. But if you have been out of compliance before, you know it's more easily resolved by being proactive than not. And DHCD tries to provide gentle reminders usually, and we just did that as we count down the deadline for submitting. And it's an easy fix by preventing it better than once it's happened. So work with your program administrator once again to get this exception request done. And just kind of as a side note on that, it's locality specific. It's not just per project. So you get it done for your locality and it will apply to each of their projects. Okay, Stuart, next slide. Some key takeaways here. Public hearings and workshops. Yay, another one, like Stuart said, you're already participating in this today. So some things may have already been done and some things you're making a commitment to do. So your being present today is one of the commitments you're making in that contract negotiation record punch list. Audits and leverage without an exception being approved in advance. Financial elements come to a halt, like I said, in CAMS when you're out of compliance. That means no money can go anywhere until we get that rectified. Appropriate documentation of leverage commitments is required. I felt the need to mention that because those commitment letters or documentation can come in different forms. And personally, I've seen a lot of different styles. You and your program administrator need to agree on what documentation has to be presented. So depending on what you already have, go from there. But your PA may ask you to help seek out other documentation, and that should be discussed in this meeting, depending on what you came into this meeting with from the application. Just know that might be necessary. Unresolved issues and clearance of findings. I jokingly said to my colleagues that I kept thinking of this scripture that says, "Be sure your sin will find you out." So I don't know that it's necessarily a sin, but just do know that everything in your project follows to the next one, and the status of all of your existing projects go from one to the other as well, and including the findings from a previous project, and it can impact your future applications. Okay, next slide. So you think we're reaching the end of the list. Woohoo, we're getting close to our time frame here where we'll have a contract coming pretty soon. Well, sort of. Number 20 says full pre-contract review, and it's a little different than what most people probably think. When we get to the full pre-contract review, that's on your program administrator. It's one activity, but it's kind of an all-inclusive, really big deal. The program administrator's hopefully been a great partner up to this point, and you've done this back and forth communication for weeks to complete all these activities and reach the approval of each version of what you need. But now the program administrator has to review even more, and it's not a part of the punch list. So take a deep breath. You're about to see the finish line. You're within the darn red date, on the record, but now you're at the mercy of this review, unfortunately. What does that even mean? Stuart, if you'll go to the next slide. Probably the number one question we hear, whether you're saying it to other people or directly to us. There's no shame. We know it happens. So, and we've jokingly said, okay, we've done our part. What's taking her so long, or what's going on up there? We know, we get it. Rest assured, it is still a process, even when your 1 through 19, so to speak, is done. We're nearing the home stretch, but we're preparing an entire contract package that involves a lot more than what's just on that list. It's sort of like seeing the man behind the curtain in, the Wizard of Oz. So here are some realities. Stuart, the next slide. I'm going to read this verbatim because I hope this sticks in your mind, and I want you to have this slide later. The contract negotiation record punch list is not a complete list of everything you will need to provide, period. Your PA has several internal checklists to complete before a contract can be drafted for DHCD's review, period. Your program administrator may also have supplemental contract checklists to help communicate these additional needs. Those do exist, and we might be able to make those available. I've found that they're very helpful for your program administrator and for the grantee, because emails back and forth saying, I need this, 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 and this, you quickly realize you need to develop an additional checklist. The punch list is not all inclusive. Next slide. So here's what it looks like. The from us to you. Literally, this is like the kind of the flow of once that package is together. Let's say we've got all of our contract package together, and your program administrator packages it all up, works with the program, their program manager to get it ready to go out the door for the various DHCD approvals. This is the chain that it follows. It goes through the policy analyst, the program manager, associate director, senior deputy director, and then back to the grantee. But wait, there's more. Stuart, the next slide. Now it's going to sit for a minute. Again, another potential pitfall. You have to stay on top of when the contract comes back to you, needing signatures. Where is it? Is it because the meeting has not for 2 more weeks when the folks need to be together to sign it? Has someone forgotten it? Did someone not get an email? What's going on? It should follow this chain, but this is also a potential time pitfall. Once it's back to you with the final draft ready for signatures, the grantee will return the signed contract to DHCD. Then it goes to the senior deputy director to execute it, which includes notarizing. The DHCD upload takes place, and the contract gets put in CAMS. Sometimes we're blessed to have someone who will also send that to us in an email, but the obligation on DHCD's part is to see that it's in CAMS for you to download and save for your files. So you can see by the from us to you and you to us and the back and forth, it goes a long track. Some need to know items, Stuart, if you want to go to the next slide. And then some need to know items here, just as you're kind of preparing for things to go into CAMS or preparing to get your documents ready to go into that package. Just a few little details. Remember that the user guide and the help desk are also your friends when it comes to files and CAMS. Who puts what, where, and when? That's for you and your program administrator to also work out. But in general, typically uploading anything into files and documents in CAMS is the grantee's responsibility. Early in the process, you've already worked out your communication style. I know as a program administrator, I may have a different style than some of my colleagues. But again, you should be able to work out a process that works for both of you. I prefer to look at emails, get that down to where we want it to be our final copy, and then I'll say, okay, you're good to go ahead and upload that in CAMS. Or I may be in there and say, I'll go ahead and do that right now. But it is ultimately the grantee's responsibility. Next slide. And just a couple of CAMS basics as you're doing this, because again, it's a part of your punch list or contract negotiation record, because a lot of this stuff is going to be communicated through us or captured in CAMS. Just remember what types of files, the sizes. I know different folks with different systems can sometimes experience difficulty depending on their file size or type. But again, we've got a user guide, you've got us, you've got a help desk. And there is a difference between naming your file, of course, and naming a file in CAMS. As much as possible, and for various reasons, internally, it is very, very helpful when we can lead the title of a file, no matter where the file is, with the project number. Because often we have to search or minimizes the having to look for something if it at least starts with the project number. And I've just provided a sample there from Possumville to show you the number, the grantee, the name of the project, and the type, if possible, but the number would at least be helpful. Okay, Stuart, next slide. So we finished our punch list. It's go time. Everybody's ready to go. Everybody's ready, and now ready for lunch too, probably. But everybody is finished with this contract negotiation record and the punch list. And I just want to make sure to provide a couple of little, psst, hey, as a PA, I've got a couple of little things that may be of help, just for especially for new folks. Remember to use your CDBG manual and appendices. Chances are, if a grantee comes to me and says, hey, where's this or that? I get it. We're all busy. I may be able to give you a quick answer, but if not, I may need to look it up too. So why didn't you do that before you contacted me? Let's save each other some time, because I'm going to go there too. Your program administrator is here to help. And oftentimes, just like you, we're, running on coffee and 4 hours of sleep, and, we're filling a gap of someone not in the office or whatever the case may be. So we're here to help, but we're also here to help each other. Don't reinvent the wheel and don't rely on old habits. And we can interpret that however we want, but I found both to be true. Some non-project specific products, here's some good news, may be in your existing files. So work with your PA to determine which of these can be repurposed. Your locality may have already adopted something recently on an entirely different project that you may not even be working on. Or go, oh yeah, I'm so down in the weeds, I forgot we did that on such and such 2 weeks ago. You may be able to grab that and reuse it. And there again, it's a time saver. So as we work to the why and we work toward how to save time and solve that big question of what's taking them so long, everywhere you can try to save time, the better. Next slide, Stuart. And again, we can't reiterate it enough. If you've got questions, I'll try to look at the chat and answer them, but I want everybody to get to lunch and get us on time. But we also want to make sure that if you have something that needs to be captured for us to follow up with later, please put it in the chat.
Hey, Deanna.
Yes.
Some of our fellow staff has added some helpful tips to the chat.
Yay.
I can kind of read through a few of these while we're waiting for people to add questions to the
Okay.
chat.
And I just opened it too, Jenna. I'm looking at it with you.
All right. So Elizabeth reiterated what you said about how the appendices can be helpful, and she mentioned Appendix 3 for the project budget. And she mentioned something interesting about submitting items to the local governing body last minute might not be a good idea because sometimes they can defer items. Marcia said pick or it didn't happen. And then you can submit a waiver request if needed. Also, if you're out of compliance, it affects all of your DHCD projects. And then also, like you mentioned, the CAMS user guide is a great resource.
Yes. And as you'll see from that, especially with Marcia's comment about pictures, that's something you can't fix later. Let's say you're in your compliance review, it's either there or it's not. We work really hard together to help find any way possible to keep you in compliance throughout the process. But that's one of those things. If you didn't get a picture of that, then, and it's gone, well, it's gone. That's a finding that just can't be corrected. We'll probably put this back up in just a sec, but can we go to the next slide? Usually in our contract negotiation meetings, we kind of fall to this whole, if all hearts and minds are clear at this point, I had to ask Stuart, refresh my memory because it's been so long. What's that thing you say at weddings? It's like, for now or ever hold your peace. If all hearts and minds are clear, your meeting would be conducted at this point and completed. And everybody walks out with all their notes and ready to hit the ground running. So with that being said, it's also break time. So we're finished.
Just add one thing real quick. We mentioned pictures, and great job, Deanna. But it's not just pictures. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And almost as importantly, if it isn't documented, what's the auditor going to say in 5 years? when somebody from an outside agency comes in who doesn't know you. You may not be there. You may have won the lottery. Who doesn't know the project, who doesn't know the staff, sometimes, just to be honest, doesn't care. Um, you know, we don't want anybody to ever have to repay money. So think about planning not just as you get under contract and that darn red date, as is one of our new acronyms. Think about looking, documenting things for 5 years from now to make sure you got under contract properly. That's one of our big concerns. So thank you all, and thank you, Deanna, for doing such a great